All right. Thank you so much, Cheryl. Meanwhile, we are watching Evergrande inching closer to default. The company missing a key debt payment yesterday. Beijing hesitating to bail out, not hesitating. It is very clear, saying that it will not bail out and get ready for the collapse of Evergrande, asking local governments to prepare for that eventuality. Let's talk about Evergrande and the China threat right now with Jonathan Ward. He is joining us right now. He is from the Atlas organization and the author of China's Vision of Victory. Jonathan, good to see you. Thanks very much for being here.
Hi, Maria. Nice to see you, too.
What are your thoughts first on Evergrande, Jonathan? A lot of conversation this week about the potential for contagion of Evergrande. Obviously, it is the second largest property developer, the most indebted company in the world, $300 billion in liabilities. Do you worry that this demise or upset in this property market in China will have a contagion effect on the U.S.?
Well, hopefully not. I mean, I think that's the situation. As the Wall Street Journal has explained, it's the world's biggest asset bubble is housing in China. I mean, it's 30% of Chinese GDP and represents over 70% of household wealth in China. I mean, that's the property housing market. So to have so much debt in this market in general, and then to have this big company, and it's one of the biggest companies in the world, number 125 on the Fortune 500, on the brink of collapse, obviously presents a huge situation for the Chinese government. But they have all the tools that they need to probably control the spread of this, whether or not they allow the bank itself to collapse. I think they are going to be most concerned with making sure that doesn't spread to other areas of the banking sector or the housing market itself. So they'll have their hands full with that.
Jonathan,
they're able to control
Ray Dalio was speaking. Yeah, go ahead, finish. I'm sorry. I'm jumping the gun. I thought you were right.
Go ahead.
Ray Dalio spoke at the Greenwich Summit on investing, and he said that the debt crisis of Evergrande is all manageable. It's all manageable, according to Ray Dalio. Investors will be stung, but that's how it works, he says. We've talked a lot about investing or not investing in China, as it is pretty much expanding the CCP's ability. President Biden is going to be meeting with the prime ministers of Australia, India, and Japan today, Jonathan, the so-called Quad. What are you expecting out of this meeting, and what should the leadership of these countries be thinking about as China continues to rise?
Going back to the Dalio comments in Evergrande, though, I mean, that is the bigger problem. I mean, it's less the ability of the CCP to control contagion in its own property sector, and it's more the question of why are people really going over to China. I mean, it has so many structural problems. I mean, we're on the verge of a new Cold War. It's a hostile state. It's carrying out a genocide, all these things that we all know. And yet to have major institutions, like BlackRock saying you should triple your allocations to China. I mean, at some point, people have to be looking at this and seeing that it's not the market that they thought it would be. I mean, it's a very, very risky place geopolitically and also in terms of its own economics. And I think worst of all, it really requires the participation of Western institutions to stay afloat. And we don't really want to be tied into that for that long, given the national security concerns and the concerns for people whose money is being put into this market. So I think, Dalio has been out there championing China and even saying it's a rising empire and we should invest in it. I mean, that's absolutely wrong. And I think people need to push back hard on people like Dalio and Fink at this point. It's really gone on way too long to have champions of the People's Republic of China in the West on Wall Street. It's just wrong. And Soros has taken that up, and he's been right. And I think that's been an important battle of the titans there to see a bit of a rift there in the thinking. So clearly not everyone on Wall Street is on this page, but it's really time for Americans to start pushing back on those who are advocating China. And as for the Quad today,
and of course, we've got an article in the Journal out of Singapore. U.S. and European companies operating in China are feeling the effects as the country increasingly turns inward. So you've got American companies readying to go operate in China. What do you want to say to those companies who are about to go look at that 1.4 billion person population as a big opportunity to sell their wares? But are they missing a major national security risk for the United States, and also missing the fact that they're not going to be prioritized by the CCP, being foreigners?
Well, that's exactly right. This is going to end very badly for a lot of companies. I mean, I think people are still going after this billion-person market. And yes, there's been success there. But as the Communist Party cracks down on sector after sector and creates new laws that are designed really to take control of foreign assets and do all sorts of things. I mean, we have to remember that historically, China has really been a closed country. I mean, ever since Marco Polo, Westerners have wanted to go over there and succeed. But the bottom line is it doesn't always end well. And it's quite, I think Xi Jinping's strategy here is really to close up, to indigenize the key industries. And the multinationals are, I think, looking at a very different sort of imagined China here that may not be real for them. What's real now may not be real in years. And I think their shareholders need to care about this. So because at the end of the day, if your growth strategy relies on China, if your supply chain relies on China, you're going to get burned. And China's building a military that's
and one thing that is real is this back and forth between China and Taiwan. There was more back and forth overnight, Jonathan. Taiwan is accusing China of bullying after the CCP sent 19 warplanes into Taiwan's air defense identification zone. Taiwan calling China an arch criminal, saying that they have no right to oppose the island's bid to join a pan-Pacific trade pact, Jonathan. This is heating up. We know that the CCP wants to reunify Taiwan. Do you expect the CCP to invade Taiwan? And it's now questionable whether or not the United States is going to be there, given the cut and run that we just saw out of Afghanistan.
Well, look, I think that the security picture in the Indo-Pacific is changing a great deal. And you mentioned the Quad summit today in Washington, D.C., which is incredibly important. I mean, the grouping of India, Japan, Australia, and the United States, I mean, those are going to be the cornerstones of Indo-Pacific security and ideally also Indo-Pacific economics, because we're going to have to start to let the air out of the bag with the Chinese economy and get less invested in that and find new markets and basically rebuild an Indo-Pacific that can withstand the rise of China. So with military exercises between those four countries being an annual thing at this point through Malabar, and with an increasing sort of interest in this grouping through the leaders of these countries, I think you're starting to see a very clear sort of consolidation of a democratic counterpoint to China in the Indo-Pacific. So, of course, that's very good for Taiwan, which is, stuck right in the middle of this. And I think, they have many reasons to be very worried about China's intentions. I mean, China's made its intentions very clear, and the incursions into the ADIZ are sort of the regular pace of events at this point. So countering this and having the military equipment and military interoperability that will allow us to basically deter China, whether it's in the Taiwan Straits or in other parts of the region. I mean, this is going to be essential for the U.S. And for other countries, too. I mean, it's essential for Japan. If China were ever to actually seize control of Taiwan, and sea lanes are choked off instantly. There are Chinese military manuals that talk about the ability to create famine in Japan through the control of Taiwan. So I think everybody understands that, and it's why it's such an essential piece of the military geography of Asia. And it will have to be, at the end of the day, we'll have to deter the Communist Party of China. And they're building a military that is designed for use. So I think that's the part that we can't underestimate. We have to get very serious about this picture very fast.
And this is, of course, one of the topics that will be discussed today by the Quad. Jonathan, good to see you. Thanks very much for weighing in on all of that. Jonathan T. Ward joining us this morning on the risk of the CCP.